record on this computer. Okay, and we are recording. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a long time since the collective had an interview and a chat, and I've always said that any chance or subject that comes my way, I will take. And I am really delighted that the doyen of the Household Troops Band, Major John Mott, has agreed to be a victim. Not a composer, but someone who has lived a very full and interesting life. So, Major John, welcome to the collective.
Thank you.
So, normally this was created to interview composers, and there were a few that I interviewed that were like yourself, bandmasters, and had interacted with musicians of all shapes and sizes throughout the army world. And most devotees will have read that from cover to cover,
okay. Yeah.
Which I have. But I know we've said a little bit before when we were setting up the interview, but obviously there's a CB Mott that was, I think you said your father who had some works published.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
So where did it begin for you? I mean, you had a father who was a bandmaster, so I presume you're, army child, and
yeah, I'm a third generation Salvationist. My grandfather was the one who started it all off. He was a bit of a musician as well, but never a conductor or anything like that. He played in the band on double B and the G trombone, as I remember. So I heard him once or twice, but he'd long past his best by the time I was around. But he set a very good example, and we all followed suit. Basically, my father was a child prodigy. Do you know what one of those is?
Very Mozartian.
Yeah, he could play the piano by about the time he was 6, and play very well, and remained a very good extemporary pianist all of his life until he died. He died relatively young, in his early 70s, and with cancer. But he could play the piano beautifully. I would just sit in the front room where the piano was always located and just sit there and listen to him play. I'm one of 3 brothers. I'm the middle one, and I call myself the black sheep of the family, because everybody left the army, including my father and both my brothers, but I remained. So that's why I call myself the black sheep. I delighted my grandfather by so doing, and so I did win somebody's approval at least. So, and he encouraged me no end. My father was sometimes a stranger to me, in that he was never very close to any of us 3 boys. We were all boys. I'm sure he loved my mother very much, and you could tell that, but his mind was always somewhere else. He was an electrician by trade, but really wasn't very interested in it. It was a means to an end. The only thing he really wanted to know was music. Writing it, playing it, being absorbed in it. That was his entire life. And I would come home. I can remember as a teenager being out with some girl or other and coming home at, say, 11:30 at night, and there he sat on the dining room table with these huge manuscript pages. I mean, they were very big in those days, and with a mapping pen. Do you know what a mapping pen is? A very small.
No.
It's a very small pen, but it does give you a very fine legibility. So, and he was a very good writer of manuscript. You could read his manuscript notes so easily, and he did it in Indian ink, because he would write out the parts for the band, and they could take it to the open air and play it in the rain. The Indian ink didn't run.
Yeah, it's probably it had to be hot to stay.
Yeah, there is a very famous story of him when I'm sure this is in the book. So, well, no, it's not in that book. It's in another one. But he went to Crystal Palace, not before, when I was not around, but when he was younger, and I was just a baby, I think. And he heard the tune Silver Hill for the first time, played by the mass bands at the end of the contest, 1937, something like that.
Yeah.
He left London, came home from memory, wrote out the score, wrote all the parts to the band. The Sunday morning, the next morning, as the bandmaster, he took all these parts on manuscript paper in the open air. He gave all the parts out, and they played Silver Hill for the first time, having heard it the night before. That's his that's his most important claim to fame. But he did write a few pieces, yeah, and they were published in the 30s and one or two others. But I think I mentioned this march called Cambridge Citadel, which I didn't rate very highly, nor did anybody else, I don't think. It was written to order, I think, for some new instruments or something like that, but it was done in a Friday afternoon, I think. But however, nevertheless, he could write very good. But like I said, he was a bit of a stranger to me in that he wasn't terribly interested in any of our musical progress. If we wanted to progress musically, we had to do it of our own volition. And my older brother taught himself to play the cornet and became a very good cornet player. Was in the RAF Central Band and all that kind of stuff. My younger brother became a cornet player. He was in the band of the Isle of Sutherland Highlanders, wearing a kilt. I did not play the cornet, nor could I. I could play the baritone badly, and when I joined the YP band, I was promoted to euphonium. I was the only euphonium in the YP band. And there's a lovely story, I think it's in that book, about me taking lessons from a Mr. Johnson, who lived in another part of the town. And I had to catch a bus for lessons from Mr. Johnson on this euphonium. It had no case. It was a short, squat affair. Not as looked at. Have you ever seen them?
I've seen variations of them.
Yeah,
and some of those early instruments are just sort of a very blue peatery thing.
Made by the army.
Yeah.
Salvation Army euphonium. And of course, I took it on the bus to Mr. Johnson's. And imagine the embarrassment one night when I was going down to his house on the bus. 3 of my friends from school got on the bus. And they went to the front. I was on really near the door, waiting to get off. And they were cajoling me and calling out all kinds of insulting things about me and the trumpet I was holding. And as I got to step off the bus, on the running step there, one of them called out, "Oi, Motty, which end do you blow that thing with?" So I pointed to the mouthpiece. I said, "Well, I use this end. But if I had a mouth as big as yours, I'd use the other end," and quickly fled down the street. But that's that. But I was no good as a player at all. I didn't advance. I was hopeless until my father gave the bass trombone player in the senior band. I was then 15, I think. He gave him the sack because he didn't turn up for a gig. You could do that in those days. "Where did you get to last night, Joe?" "Well, and all right, okay. Well, if you can't do it, you know what to do. You would get a little job in the Corps, and the officer will find you a job to do." And so he said, "Yeah, you're out," he says. So they left the bass trombone position vacant. So I said to him, "I think I'd like to learn to play that." "Oh, you wouldn't stand a chance. It's a bass clef. You've got to learn the shifts, and you've got to, I've heard you play the euphonium, and it's not very good, and all the rest of it." Anyway, so right, that's all I needed. 6 weeks later, I'd mastered it. A terribly cumbersome instrument because it had a handle.
Idea.
Oh yeah, well, it had a handle to reach the low notes. Bottom D flat could only be reached by extending the slide to its utmost length with the handle out.
Yeah, okay.
So it's a pedal D flat, and you went right to the bottom. And but I learned to play it, and of course he was the bandmaster, and I went back to him after this period and said, "I think I'm ready to." "Oh, all right." He was terribly surprised I'd even bothered to practice. I went down the hall every lunchtime and practiced for an hour every day. Went back to work, and then I eventually joined the band. That was the making of me as far as playing was concerned. And then I had an audition when I joined the RAF and all the rest of it. And so, but I became a bandmaster for the first time in the Royal Air Force. So that was my early stages of musical development, or lack of it, actually. So
what's interesting is that when you talk to folk, there is always the local character in the core that's the one that stays in the memory. For me, it's my YPSM. She still is a formidable lady who I greatly enjoy the company of. But if your father wasn't, as you say, the family wasn't sort of interested in your progression, was there anyone in the core who sort of said, "Come on, John, let's have a tune before practice"? Who were the
there
local
was,
core members that sort of were your encouragers that stand out in your memory?
well, yes, I'll tell you who he was. But my father had done 25 years, 27 years as the bandmaster. I've been in the band about 18 months, and he decided to retire. And the man who followed him was the man who encouraged me more than my father had done. And he stayed the bandmaster for a long time now, and only died at the age of 102 about 4 or 5 years ago, and remained a firm friend all my life, really, even while I was an officer and all the rest of it. Always encouraging.
So I mean, you said you sort of joined up with the forces and went in that. So obviously, did your music playing continue and get strengthened in the up? Because you go into the forces and you have to be absolutely spot on all the time. Nothing less than perfect is
right. Now, I mean, I played, and it was quite by accident that the station commander where I was stationed heard that I had an audition for the central band. What they wanted me to do was to sign on for 5 years. I was not prepared to do that. Because I refused to sign on for 5 years, they said, "I'm sorry, we don't want you. You're an idiot. Off you go." But it was on my form somewhere or other. So when I was posted to this station, he discovered that I'd done this. He said, "I want to form a band," he said, "and I'd like you to organize it for me." And oh, all right then. So this was only a place called RAF Upwood in Huntingdonshire, not far from home.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a whistle round to see how many plays I could find. I could only find about 10. It was I wanted a brass band and not a military band with clarinets and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There were 2 other stations not far away, so I contacted both of those, and they each provided 4 or 5 or 6 players. So we had about 22 players that would do parades and officers' mess dinners and whatever was needed, really, in the time I was there. So I conducted this band for the 2 years I was in the Royal Air Force, and that was good practice. But as a player, I didn't do very much playing, except I was still in the band at home. I used to come home for band practice, even because it was so near.
Yeah. So was it okay? Were you one of these young chaps who, if the opportunity took you to go down to London to Fairfield Hall or to the Royal Albert Hall or these big Regent Hall to see these big bands and doing all these famous concerts that were legendary, was that something that was your lifestyle, or were you not that kind of person?
No. The only time I remember going to the Regent Hall was with my father. 1939, I think it was. I was 6. And he didn't have any option because my mother said to him, "You either take one of these 3 or you don't go." So I got the short straw and went with. But I can remember now who was the conductor of the staff band. The staff band had a weekend every year at the rink. Every year they had a traditional weekend. And Eric Ball was the conductor, and they played the King of Kings for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember Eric Ball's hair. He had a shock of hair that kind of stood up. And as he conducted vigorously, I was fascinated by this shock of it kept wobbling all the time.
You can imagine.
Etc. So I was fascinated by that, but there you go.
So I mean, yeah, okay. So it was a very memorable occasion. So in your youth and growing up and post sort of doing your military service, did you sort of encompass any of the army greats as they went through the Ray Stedman Allens, the Dean Goffins, the Eric Bulls, these names that have become so legendary to us? I mean, they would all go around and do band concerts just all around the country.
Well, I met two of them. I met RSA when he was a captain first, because the man I told you about who became the bandmaster after my father was a great friend of RSA, and he would come to his house. He was quite a wealthy man, this man, and he would often come. Ray and Joy would come for the weekend, and of course, come Sunday morning, he would come to the meeting in his uniform, and the bandmaster would often say to Ray, "Look, you conduct the band this morning." And I could remember playing under his baton at the age of 16, 17, whatever it was, and a very indistinct, delayed beat. The Enfield bandmaster, Jimmy Williams had the same thing. It was a palm, 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 but you all know where the click of the beat was, so we all played together. It was a very strange thing. I've seen it in a few other men as well over the years, but I met him there. Norman Bearcroft I met when I was just about 21, 22. He came to Northampton to do bandsmen's councils, and we all went. And the band, the Coventry City Band, were there, and they played the Call of the Writers. That was the very first time I heard that. And that became a signature tune of the Troops Band. We played it everywhere.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard it played live, Call of the Righteous. Yeah. And in terms of whenever I've seen a Household Tunes Band, it was either at Felixstowe or outside the Royal Albert Hall on a parade. So it was the summer concerts.
Yeah.
But that's the story for another time. So you're growing up in your local corps, and you've done military service.
Yeah.
So what next? Was there local officer commissions? Deputy bandmaster.
Yes.
You said you became a songster leader because you got to know a lot of the really classic songster music.
That's right.
Yes.
Well, what happened was Percy was the name of this bandmaster, and he was still there, and he wanted to be the songster leader, and but he wouldn't make his mind up whether he wanted the band or the songsters. In the end, the officer decided for him. So look, John will. Oh, I missed a bit out. This is when I went to Kettering. My company moved me to Kettering, and there I became the YP band leader. It was at Kettering. I was there about 4 years, I guess. I learned a lot there, a lot. Became the YP band leader. I had some good players. Trevor Groom was on euphonium in the YP band in those days. Michael Barrett was on cornet. They were stuck even in the YP band at that age, and they were not kids, not young kids. They were, because you couldn't go into the senior band, not in the Kettering band of those days, until you were at least 18 or something like that. So you had these kids who could all play, and it was great. And I learned a lot there, and I learned a lot in the Kettering band. It was a huge band when I first went there. 40 players. 6 trombones. When I got there, the bandmaster, Donald Manning's father, whose name I've forgotten.
No,
it doesn't matter. Anyway, he said, "What do you play?" I said, "The bass trombone." Oh, says, "We've got 2 of those." So he said, "I can offer you a trombone, a tenor trombone." I said, "Okay, that'd be fine." I was the second trombone. And then about 6 months after I joined the band, one of the bass trombone players left, retired, with honours. Another one moved to Worcester. So then he said to me, "Would you like to?" That's how I met Eric Bull for the second time. He came and did a rehearsal at Kettering Band.
Yeah.
We played the Kingdom Triumphant for the first time. And that D flat I'm telling you about is the last note of the Kingdom Triumphant. It comes down the scale slowly, getting more and the notes get more and more extended, and it finishes on this bottom D flat. And I played it in the rehearsal, and my head was spinning with the pressure that I'd put into that to make good impression on Eric Bull. Anyway, so that's just a little story from there. But then I came back to Cambridge. That's when we had the decision who was going to be what. So,
Yeah.
So he said, well, I'll stay the bandmaster. I said, that's fine. I'll do the songsters then. And I was very happy doing the songsters. Had a big brigade, a lot. And so we do a bit of special league. I introduced, this seems a long time ago, and it was. It would be in the 60s, I guess. I introduced a drummer and a string bass player, added to the piano. So the ISS weren't the first ones to do that, because we'd done that well before. And it just gave a little bit of something extra for certain songs, not every song, but for certain rhythmic kind of songs, it worked very well. And I was very happy doing that, until God intervened in my life in a big way and said, I want you to be an officer in the army. And I kept, are you sure about this, God? And I argued with him for about 2 or 3 years. I did go a long discussion. So at the ripe old age of 38, I entered the training college reluctantly, and didn't enjoy it at all. The training period then, as now, Lightbringers, okay. 1970, I think it was.
Okay.
And we were called Lightbringers, and it was still 2 years. But after 1 year, there were 3 of us, actually 3 cadets who, what we might call mature. We were all just about 40, and they put us out to farm in Corps around near the training college. Mm-hmm. So we had to come in for certain lessons and certain lectures, but we ran the Corps the rest of the time. My wife stayed at home and with the kids, of course, and so she ran things, but I had to come in and do a few things. And I was late once. The training, we had a morning assembly every morning. And on my way in by car from where the Corps was, 7 miles from the training college, that's all, not far, I had to come through Sydenham, mm-hmm. in southeast London. And as I sort of drove up the high street, I heard this band playing. And I stopped the car, wound the window down. Sure enough, this band is getting louder and louder. And it's a band of the Royal Marines, full dress uniforms, about 50 of them, marching up the high street behind me. And I said to somebody, well, what's that? Oh, they're opening a new supermarket. So they hired the band to create a bit of a stir. And I had to listen to this band, didn't I? Oh. And consequently, I was late for the principal's lecture. And as I crept in the back, good of you to join us, Mott, he said. So they called everybody by your surname in those days. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I lasted a year, and then I continued to look after the Corps for 2 years after that. My very first meeting as an officer, there were 18 people there. There were no band, there was no songsters, no musical accompaniment at all, apart from a retired lady brigadier who fancied herself as a pianist, but she was the only one that did fancy herself as a pianist. So I chose the first song, and it was quite clear that the tune she had selected had nothing to do with the words. So we staggered through one verse, and then up from the piano, she said, I'm sorry, Lieutenant. She said, if I seem to have got the wrong tune, but I'll carry on with this tune. Could you just sing Hallelujah at the end of the first and third and fourth line? And I'm sure the tune will work. It didn't go anywhere near it, but we struggled through the whole song like that. And that was my introduction as an officer in charge of the Corps.
Well, are you going to? Would you be brave enough to tell me what your first Corps point was?
It was a place. It's not long ago. It's closed. A place called Downham. It was between Bromley and Lewisham in South London. So that was the place, but no longer there. I took my present wife a few years ago. I said, I'll show you where I started. We got there. It was a block of flats. So there you go.
Yeah. That's interesting because I've been looking at photos of, I think it's Manchester Star Hall, and you know, when that was in its heyday, how it had illuminated signs and
huge building.
Yeah, never been to Manchester, so I wouldn't know.
The little entrance, but when you got inside the entrance, vast.
Yeah, I had to convince a friend of mine a while ago that there was actually a sizable Salvation Army corps on, just off Oxford Circus on Regent Street. And she said, I used to walk down there. I said, it's a little tiny doorway, but there's
That's right.
magic in between.
Yeah, that's right.
Uh,
The Star Hall is a bit like that as well. Yeah.
I think it's a convalescent place now. So no, it's one of those places I would love to have been to, but never did. So God manages to get his clutches on John Mott, and
Yeah.
you get through the training and are appointed to the field.
Yeah.
In your book, you say you're at corps appointments, and quite happily so. And out of the blue, you get a phone call from Jackie Proctor, is it?
Yes.
Who says, "Guess what's happening tomorrow?"
Yes.
Did you have? Was there any kind
I
of?
had no inkling at all.
Did
I
you
mean,
find out how your name was chosen? Because you said it's not something that you were happy as a corps officer, and
I'll tell you how it happened. I was very good friends with Norman Bearcroft from around about
yeah.
78 onwards, and he got me to go to Butlins,
Oh yes.
and I went to Butlins for 25 years with Norman on the entertainments team, doing whatever was necessary.
Yeah, I remember it well.
Conducting a band or playing the fool in a sketch or whatever it was. And
twice nightly in the Gaiety Theatre.
That's right. Yeah, 2,500, 3,000 people each time.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I remember it.
And I think the names of some of the names of the shows are in that book. Following it may not be, no, because that's about the Troops Band, but we did lots of shows. Anyway, it was Norman's influence, because he'd seen me very close at hand. He knew that I got aspirations by and by, but I had no idea. And then Jackie, I was stationed in Northern Ireland then, quite happily there, although it was difficult at the time. But she rang up one Monday afternoon and said, "Hello, John, you're coming to join us." And she got a real Luton Airport voice. She still has. She's a very good friend.
I don't think I've ever heard her.
Yeah, she's a wonderful singing voice.
I can say she's got a reputation as a soprano or something, I believe.
Oh yeah, she sang like an angel.
Yeah,
wonderful, very outstanding. She was in the ISS for years till she emigrated to Australia. And when the Troops Band went to Australia, she organised a whole tour for us. So yeah, but Jackie rang me and told me, and when I got there, she was my secretary. So we got on very well together. And it was Les Condon. I told you that story about Les Condon turning up with motorbike gear and encouraging me and saying, wishing me well.
So where were the officers then? Because obviously music and SP&S and bandmaster,
they were all
separated out, weren't they?
It was in the old building of NHQ, National Headquarters, still in the same place as where THQ is now, but a very different building. They knocked that one down and built this one there. But I was in the old building. There were little tiny offices, about the same size as mine here, I suppose. But and the desk was here, and the door was there, and a window, and that was about it. So, but it didn't matter. I wasn't there very much. I was out and about, and that was my determination when I became the national bandmaster, to be out there where the bands were, not in the office typing letters or whatever. She did all that, but
so what was it, a sort of a culture shock to become national bandmaster? Because you say you're doing an officer, you're a Salvation Army officer serving local corps folk in Northern Ireland and in South London.
Very much so.
How was it? Obviously Norman had seen you got a head on your feet and you can think on your feet and the challenges.
Yeah.
I just find it interesting that they didn't go to someone, I don't know, call Dean Goffin back or Trevor Davis or someone who had that kind of composery background. Because
every national bandmaster had been a composer until me.
Did that scare you that you didn't?
Yes, very much so. My sense of inadequacy was huge, because I said to somebody, I try to imagine the reactions of bandsmen throughout the country, if I was a cornet player in a Bedford Congress Hall band, and I'd just heard there'd been a new national bandmaster called John Mott, I said, who on earth's John Mott? Never heard of him. What's he written? And of course, and I had to come to my fact that I hadn't written anything, and nor have I ever. But then I take great encouragement because nor is Stephen Cobb. But so there we are. But yes, so I actually said this to Norman. He said, "We want you for who you are,
Yeah.
not for what you've done,
Or what you can't do. You're there because you've got the skills, the skill set that's required. I think is required, because Norman would very much be that kind of a deal.
Yeah, I tell you what I did as a policy when I first got there. This was 1980 something. It's in the book. There were 23 divisions in those days, and I thought I'm going to visit every division in the time I've got here. I thought I'd give myself 5 years in that job, and in 5 years I thought I could get to every division one by one. And in the old days, when Norman was the national bandmaster, and when Les was the national bandmaster, but not Trevor Davis, the other two used to go visit division for 2 weeks. And they leave on Monday and they go to Wales or somewhere.
Yeah.
And they have a program every day for the next 2 weeks.
Yep.
Then they come home. And I thought, I can't. Trevor had been the bandmaster before me, and he didn't do that. So I thought I'd start that again. But I just did mine on a weekly basis. So I still went on a Monday, did a band practice on the Monday night somewhere. So you had to do everything through the DC in those days. You couldn't just pitch up and just do it. So you'd write to the DC some weeks ahead. And I said, I'm coming to the division. I'd like to have a look at some of the bands, do some encouraging, chat to them, do the rehearsals, whatever it was. And I said, what we'll try and do, if we can, if you could organize this, please, is that I'll do one large band, 2 medium-sized bands, and maybe 2 other small bands to get together, put them together for one night, so they could enjoy a rehearsal with slightly more adventurous music. Well, that's what I did, and that seemed to work extremely well. I was received very warmly indeed, and people saying, "Oh, we remember Les Conning coming, we remember Norman coming," and all this kind of. And what they imposed upon me was the DCs. Oh, we want you to inspect the instruments. Oh, all right. So
you
yes. So on one occasion, I think up somewhere in Lancashire, when I got there in the evening, every instrument was laid out in band formation on the floor, all gleaming. They'd all been told to clean them because the national bandmaster was going to come. But it didn't happen very often, but that one occasion it did. But the idea of it was insurance.
Yeah.
So most bands, well, nearly all bands, had underinsured their instruments. And some of them were worth thousands. The bigger bands were worth thousands. But very often the smaller bands, say a band of, say, 10 or 12 or less, had 18 instruments. Oh, that's when we used to be, that was in the 30s when we were, we never know, we might get them back again. I said, well, they'll all be dead by now. So, but they kept these instruments just in case. I'll have to go get a drink in a minute. But the point was...
What I'll do is
So that's where we were. And I had a good reception everywhere I went, everywhere.
It's very interesting to see that, because it didn't happen very often. But when I remember talking to Paul Drury and talking about his music, and he said that because of where they were, they had no concept of what to do if these kids had been mucking around with music and they'd got an arrangement or they'd done a little much for their little callback. But beyond that was, how the heck does the Salvation Army, how the heck do we get this in the journals? Who do we send it to? So did you as you were national bandmaster, did you sort of find people that over the years sort of sprouted, and you sort of they didn't really know how to come out of the little cause they were. They weren't in a big Birmingham or Manchester or Edinburgh Gorgie, but they kind of, oh, national bandmaster, I've got this. What do I do? What's a good step? Did you ever sort of come across people like that who just sort of?
Yeah, they would wait till I'd got there and they would show me a manuscript or something, a march usually. If it's their first attempt, it was nearly always a march or a hymn tune setting or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'd say to them who to send it to. But when I said that, I always had a fear that I knew the policy of the editorial department in those days was if they didn't know the name of the composer, they tended to shove it aside in a cupboard somewhere or on a shelf, which was terrible, terrible policy. But it went on for some years, did that. In fact, I think Dean Goffin's first piece that he submitted from New Zealand didn't see the light of day for about 3 years. But simply because I'd never heard of this fella and didn't know what it was. I mean, they could see it, and the musicians that were there in those days should have known the difference between good quality and otherwise. And but there you go. Yes, it did happen. It did happen, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But it's not like that. It's not like that now, I have to say.
I think I think because of the advantage of composition and the technology, although I think virtually every composer I spoke to said that basic pen and paper is still a principle, that you don't get, music score out and everything's done on the computer and you just type it in and it's all wizarded. Said, it's still pen and paper to get the draft out.
There are some people who do write like that. I know at least one man who writes on the Sibelius program, and he'll take out stuff and add his own stuff into the themes and that kind, and his own harmonies. But the basic idea, he sets it initially, take out stuff that he doesn't like and puts in stuff that is his own. So it is his own work, and but basically it's a quick mixture of the two. He's the only man I know does that, but the hard way is writing it down.
Yeah, and as a bandmaster, you've been responsible and had the joy of reading all manner of scores and music from the most basic to the most complex. But what are the sort of the ones that have you come across any kind of players that took you by surprise that have turned into? And when we spoke about Jackie Proctor earlier being this wonderful surprise, but these timid little, cornet, euphonium, trombones who just absolutely giving the glory to God in the local choir band, but they have that spark and
skill. That's right. Well, when I became the national bandmaster, I was expected to do lots of musical weekends at the choir, and my wife came with me in those days. I had to do it was always a Saturday night festival, and then the Sunday meetings, usually 2 or 3 meetings, open airs and all the rest of it. But I decided that initially I would take 2 young people with me. And I heard this young fellow play the cornet, and I thought, gee whiz, you're a good player. His name was David Dawes. And so I said to David, I said, look, I'm going to, let's say Wales or something. And would you like to come? Oh, yeah, I'll come. I said, I'd like you to play 2 or 3 solos while we're there. And the band will help you and all the rest of it. And you'll get a rehearsal on Saturday afternoon. Yeah, oh, is that all right? Yeah, oh, yeah, yes. And he was very keen. And then I also find a vocalist, a girl or something like that, who was unknown, and take them both with me. Dorothy Brown was an unknown. Dorothy Nanscoville, her name is now.
Okay, yeah.
I took her to Jersey for the weekend, and she sang and played the piano. Superb. They'd never heard of her, and but she could, beautiful singing and good pianist and all the rest of it. And lots of other young people, I took them away with me and they developed solos playing and all the rest of that. So yeah, Richard Phillips. I was going to Blackburn and I rang Richard and I said, would you play the piano? He said, yes. I said, I'll come play piano solos. He said, I'll play the cornet as well, I said, all right, I'll play a cornet solo as well then. And then he rang me 2 days later, said, oh, I'm sorry, I can't come. I've got something else to do. So I said, not to worry. So I rang a fella called Roy Kersop. I don't know if you've ever heard of Roy Kersop.
No, the name's not
He
familiar.
was a very good cornet player and a very good pianist. So I said to Roy, he was like, "Oh yeah, I'll come up." And then Richard rang me a week later. "Oh, I can come now," he says. "I've cleared that." So here I am with 2 cornet players and 2 pianists who both play the same kind of instruments. So what do you do? So the pianist accompanied the cornet player and the other way around. So they're in the both Saturday night concerts and in the Sunday stuff. And Richard rang me, he said, "What's the piano like at Blackburn?" I said, "Well, I've only been there once, but it's white." So, all right.
So you're happily tootling away in your national bandmaster role, and you're traveling the length and the breadth of the country, and really
Yeah.
try, proving your feet on the ground and getting a local connection, and just showing that the London bods aren't aliens, and you're a human
Exactly
being,
that. Exactly that.
and just trying to show your face, because we used to have a joke at Woodbridge many years ago, that the fact you get somebody from headquarters and you'd meet them at Butlins, and I'd go, "Yeah, where are you from?" I said, "Oh, trust me, you'll never have heard us. We're a very small Woodbridge, Newsbury." And he goes, "Oh," he said, "No, I don't think I've ever been there." No, we're in the W's. We're right at the bottom of the list. But
Yes.
I think it's Mark Sawyer came before he was an officer. He came and done a youth group with the at Woodbridge, and I met him at THQ and I was at Butlins, and I said, "Oh no, you won't know, you won't know." And he said, "Where?" I said, "Oh, it's a little place called Woodbridge." He said, "Down the bottom of New Street, next to the library, opposite the co-op." I went there in 1975 or whenever, and I was so
Yeah.
shocked. I never took it for granted again.
No, no.
But it's always been interesting to see that how the what we call the village calls, those small calls, Lavenham, Great Yarmouth, Lowestoft,
Yeah.
you know, they survive in I
Yeah.
remember speaking to a guy from Ipswich who came in and said, "Oh, naturally, Ipswich Citadel is older than Woodbridge." I said, "Terribly sorry, but no, we're actually older." And they could not believe that a big corps like Ipswich could be younger than a small village, because they didn't understand how corps opened and developed.
No, no, that's
So,
right.
so you're happily, motoring around and doing national
I
band
got one or
mastership.
two invitations to go to Europe while I was national bandmaster. I was asked to do bandsmen's councils in Holland.
Mhm.
And that Saturday night there beforehand, it was a very big concert in something like the Royal Festival Hall, big in Amsterdam.
Mhm.
And on the Saturday night, they said, we traditionally have a competition, not a contest. They said, a competition. I said, okay. He said, yes, each band comes on and does a 10-minute program, and we're going to ask you to be a judge. And I'd taken Michael Barrett, a cornet player from Kettering, it's a soloist, to play, and he can be a judge. And there was a trumpet player from the Concertgebouw Orchestra in Amsterdam. He was the third judge. And we had a score of the piece that the band was going to play brought up to us on the balcony,
Yeah.
pencil. We even had a little bell ready so they could tell them they could play when we were ready. Anyway, these bands all came up, several at a time. But so if the band was say 30 plus, they played on their own. But if the band was say 10 or 12, they put them together and they played a piece together. So that still made the same kind of size band. And you had to mark them accordingly, of course. So there was core bands who some of them were really good, some were not so good, and then there was others. And then the idea was there was no winner announced that night.
Mhm.
What happened was the comments of all the 3 judges were sent by post in those days to the bands concerned, so that when they got back their next practice, they say this about you and that about you, and so the bandsmen could actually hear what was said about how they did and that kind of thing.
Mm.
That was a fascinating exercise. Fascinating.
Yeah. So bearing in mind that you're doing all these tours, what I'd like to ask you at this point is, what are the pieces of music that, as a conductor, as a bandmaster, that stick out in your memory? I'm not the sort of call of the righteous as a premiere performance, But you know, if you had to take a Polaroid of your life today and say, this is my playlist over the weekend, what are the kind of the Salvation Army pieces that
Are we talking about now, are we?
well, it doesn't matter. I mean, you could be listening, you've referred to things like the King of Kings, but what are the pieces that in your mind stand out as just wonderful pieces in your opinion as a musician and as a bandmaster?
I suppose I have to say, although I didn't particularly like it, was the Kingdom Triumphant.
Yep.
Which is a big piece, big scale piece. Talks about the second coming of Christ.
Yep.
And associated tunes in it. That I
Nice
think,
Advent piece.
Yeah, I did make a deep impression upon me. There was a piece written by Dean Goffin, "Arise My Soul, Arise."
Prelude and Fugue, yes.
That's right. It was a development piece that was very popular when I was going around as a national band. Every band seemed to want to play that. Yeah. So if you played it the week before with Edinburgh, you could play it again the next week with Gloucester. Yeah. So you knew it quite well, and that kind of thing. So the same piece it's a bit like that in the Salvation Army. There's fashion.
Yes.
You know, yes. Pieces have a real popularity for 3 or 4 years, then they're forgotten.
Yeah.
You know, unless somebody digs them out from something or other. But that was one. My Strength, My Tower. That's Dean Goffin again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a rare one. You don't very often hear that. I think I've only got maybe 1 or 2 recordings of that.
He also wrote Symphony of Thanksgiving, which the troops did play quite a lot. What did we play? When I first had the troops band, I always put a classical piece on. When I say classical, a classical Salvation Army piece. It would be the King of Kings, the Old Wells, the Call of the Righteous.
Veterans.
Oh, not that far back, no, but like stuff like that, you know, from the 20s and 30s and 40s. So I put one on like that to keep the old boys in the audience interested, because I didn't like all this. We played a lot of modern stuff as well, but there was always a classic Salvation Army number in there somewhere. Yeah. I don't think I have too many favorites. Constant Trust. Have you ever heard of Constant Trust?
Oh, glorious piece, yeah.
Favorite composer would be RSA. I think he was so skillful that he could write a huge piece lasting 17 minutes, and he could also write a simple hymn tune arrangement lasting 2.5 minutes. Yeah. The same skill went into writing that. My greatest privilege as an officer, bar none, was to be asked to be the compere at Ray's final festival, his 90th birthday festival at the Regent Hall, not too many years ago.
Yeah.
And that I consider to be a huge privilege to do. I had to interview Bill Himes and
Norman came on and told the joke about the seafront, didn't he? About the blue feet.
All that stuff, yeah. So, you know, wonderful memory that is. I cherish it. I've got a DVD of that.
Yeah, mine's up there somewhere.
I'm sure it is. Yes, I'm sure it is. Yeah.
I think it was interesting because I remember saying to I think it was Rosemary that there was an RSA arrangement, and for the life of me, I said I don't know what it is. And all I could do was la 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 the backing tune, right. And I sort of recorded it and sent it to her, and she said, "Oh yeah," she said, "That's so and so." I said, "Have you got the birthday tribute DVD?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got it." And she said, "It's on there." And I think the International Staff Sergeants or whoever the brigade was actually saying, "Whosoever will."
Two Sumpter brigades from Kettering and May Chatham, I think. The corps where he'd been a soldier at.
Yeah, so it's a wonderful thing. But he reminded me of a comment that I heard from Sam Creamer in Australia, because he was talking about people like Bill Himes and conversations I've had about Leslie Condon, that these guys, as you said, like Ray Stedman, they could write these epic, not convoluted, but really complicated, complex pieces. Yeah. And then during the lunch hour, they're doing a recorded duet for their children or for the YP Corps. You're going from one extreme to the other, but it didn't faze them.
I asked Ray to write us a march called the Household Troops Band March, or the Household Troops Band. Household Troops. It's called the Household Troops. Oh, he said, when do you want it? I said, well, yeah, when we're going on tour in the summer. He said, oh, I got it 3 days later, and he'd done it in an afternoon.
Go Tell It on the Mountain, isn't it?
Sorry?
I think it's got. Is it got Go Tell It on the Mountain?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
it's not that good actually. It's not not as good as some Scarlet Jersey and the rest of his stuff, but we played it quite a few times, but not that often.
Yeah,
But,
I remember I'm coming across the recording of it, and I was like,
yeah,
it's one of these very quirky
yeah.
marches that just sort of got played for. It's been commissioned for a very specific reason.
I asked him to include the tune called Harry Appleby's March. Harry Appleby was the first bandmaster of the Household Troops in 1885.
Yeah.
And the tune is da bum bum ba da 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 dee ba da ba da ba da ba da ba dee. So and so. And it's a tune that he used to use a lot in the old troops band, which is all in that book.
Yeah.
So he built that in, and he Go Tell It on the Mountain, because we were going all over the place. So yeah, it's all there. It's all there.
Yeah. So what I'm curious is that you're national bandmaster. You're going the length and the breadth of the country, and you're being this wonderful encouragement and support to all manner of bands and bandsmen, and you're meeting the people. So what provoked the idea of the Household Troops Band? Because by then, as you said, it had been a long time since we'd had that kind of a band in the army. We've got the International Staff Band, we've got the International Staff Songsters, core bands like Kettering and Norwich and Birmingham and Edinburgh, and are really building up the strength and becoming, doing international tours. So for those people who are not lucky enough to have got a copy of the book, so where does Bandmaster Major John Mott bring the idea? What was the genesis for the Household Troops Band? Because it's an odd band to form to do parades and to do seaside.
Well, what happened was, I'll tell you how it happened. Two things happened. One is, in my office at THQ, I've got some old copies of a magazine called The Bandsman and Songster.
Yep.
But you've heard of it, have you?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it disappeared.
It was done by the musician, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, it was followed by the musician. But in the early copies of The Bandsman and Songster, there were these reports about the Household Troops Band. I also read Brindley Boone's book, Play the Music Play. Have you got that?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
You'll find there a good chapter on the old original band. And I read this, and it really captured my imagination. The idea that they could form a band from nowhere. They could march from place to place, sleep where they fell, eat if they could, that kind of stuff. And just do open air evangelical work all the time. And then I was at Cobham Hall that year, given a band, and this band was superb. I mean, they're all young fellas, and I conducted the band there, and we did a concert. We did a concert on the Saturday, and then it all disappeared. Cobham Hall was forgotten by Monday morning. Well, not forgotten, but it went out of it. All the bands that were there just disappeared. So about 2 weeks later, I went to Norman's office and I said, it's such a shame that this band has to die. What do you mean? He said, they'll come back again next year. I said, yeah, I know, but something a bit more permanent. They're such good players. I said, look, I've got this idea that I would form a band and we would tour around seaside places and do afternoon open airs and then a concert in the evening. We would march every day. That still happens, I'm pleased to say, some 30 years later. So anytime the Household Troops Band is around anywhere, they march somewhere in the afternoon. So he said, okay, well, if you can get it going, get it off the ground, do so. So Kevin Ashman was actually in the band's department at the same time. He'd been to Cobham as well, and I told him about my idea, and he said, yeah, perhaps could work. So So I contacted all the guys that have been in my band. I've had about 18 of them said yes, they joined this band who they'd never heard of. I hadn't told anybody what the name would be at all, because I knew what the band was going to be called in the end, because I'd seen it in these books, and the helmets were not part of the thing at the first in the initial stages of the band. And then I said, look, Kevin, I've got 18 players. Oh, he said, I'll ring around a few players. We'll get some good ones. And in the end, we came up with 28 players plus a percussionist and a colour sergeant. And so then I said, oh, where are we going to go? So then I had to.
I think what I will do is we've come up to the hour mark.
Okay.
I'm gonna put the interview on pause.
Right. Okay.
And I'm gonna what I always used to do in my interviews was to say a prayer, and then next week we'll leave this on a typical kind of Salvation Army cliffhanger.
Okay.
And we can have another hour or so where we can talk household troops and just the people and the places and the memories, and we can have a good time about that. So what I will do is I will draw this particular session to a close.
That's fine.
I'll just pray with you.
Yeah.
And for those people who want to hear about the Household Troops Band, and maybe we can talk a bit more about the book, tune in next week or whenever we get But thank you, Major John, for being part of this and for being kind enough to share your memories. It's always interesting to hear from someone like yourself who has travelled and met so many different people. It's been a real pleasure and an honour to speak to you. So what I will do now is I will just say a prayer, join in as you wish. Dear Lord, we are so blessed in the Salvation Army to have so many talented people, and sometimes your calling and your grabbing of the scruff of our neck is a shock, but we know that we can trust you, and we thank you that John has done exactly that through his life, that he has said yes to you and said, take me as I am, Lord. The scruffy individual, I don't know what you want in me, Lord, but it's yours. And that he has followed your will for his life, that throughout wherever he's been as a Corps officer, national bandmaster, summers camps, even on Butlins holidays, he has kept his feet on the ground and his heart closely entwined to you, Lord, and we thank you for that. I thank you for his time tonight. I thank you for his willingness and kindness in taking part, and I pray and look forward to the next session where we can delve once again into those memories. And thank you, Lord, for those inspirational people that continue to serve you in a myriad of fashions. We think of those people tonight. We think of the people like Les Condon and Jackie Proctor and Dean Goffin and Ray Stedman Allen, who continue to inspire and just energize musicians and people today who just see the name on a piece of paper and wonder what the heck it's all about, where I started, Lord. But I thank you for that. And I just pray your blessing on him as he continues, as he gets through the moving house stage, and that his family and his friends will be able to sort of find peace and contentment and get themselves sorted out amongst this COVID-y environment. But I just pray your blessing and your love on him now, and your protection as we go our separate ways. In your name I pray, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Maureen. I look forward to that. Same time next week.